Hi, welcome to my channel Mostly Knitting. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're new here, I'm Tash, and this is a weekly podcast where I talk mostly about the knitting that I've been doing during the week, and I also put out regular tutorials. Now this is a different from normal regular episode. This is an episode where I'm answering questions that viewers posted for me in previous podcasts. So if you're new here and you wanted to watch a regular episode, I'd suggest watching the one from last week. But if you're a returning viewer and you know this is a Q&A, welcome, and I'm just going to answer a few of the questions. So I do actually have my questions down here, so I'll be looking down a little bit to read from the questions, so sorry if I'm not always looking directly at the camera, but I just thought I'll introduce myself. So I'm Tash, and I'm a high school maths teacher, and I also teach knitting classes at my LYS Skein Sisters, and I live in Sydney, Australia. So I have some mostly knitting related questions, but there are a few just non-knitting personal questions, so I've put them at the end, and there's not any particular order, but I've tried to sort of at least batch ones together that are kind of related. So my first question is, do I have a knitting journal, and how do I keep track of my projects and yarn stash? So I actually don't have a knitting journal. I find I lose things like bits of paper, and so even I print out, I usually print out a pattern, or at least the relevant pages of a pattern that I need, and then I make notes on the pattern, such as any kind of changes that I make, or where I'm up to if there's a bunch of repeats, and I sort of I mark up that pattern page pretty heavily, and then I have a Ravelry project page where I put any important notes on there. I do a lot of repeat knits, and so I like to have all the information also in terms of how much yarn I've used, so like what the finished object weighs, the gauge, the size, particularly if I want to use the yarn again on that needle size, then that kind of information means I don't have to swatch again. And I guess I could get the project out and measure it and everything, but it's just easier if I've got it on Ravelry, then I don't have to dig out the garment to work out the gauge if I want to use that yarn again. And as for how I organise like my yarn stash, I have all my stash on Ravelry as well. So I am doing an organising stash video. I haven't quite finished yet. I'm still in the process of organising my stash, but at least all of it is actually recorded on Ravelry. So my organising is not so much. I'm doing a little bit of cataloguing, but it's certainly all on Ravelry. But I'm doing a sort of subcategories on an Excel spreadsheet, just in terms of different kinds of yarn and how much I have, which I have always found Ravelry is a little bit limiting, because so if I look at my stash, I've got, I guess you can sort it by yardage, but I just wanted to have a little bit more sort of subcategorized, I guess, in terms of yarn that I've only got, say, 1 or 2 skeins worth versus the sweater quantity. But it certainly is all on Ravelry, and that's kind of how I keep track of what I have. And if there's a pattern I want to make, I don't actually have to go look at my physical stash. I can look at it on Ravelry first to see how many meters or how many skeins I have of a yarn, and if it might work for a project. Right, so my second question is, what kind of project bags do I use? How do I pick them? And are there any choices I consider before purchasing? And do I make my own? So a few questions in there, but all related to project bags. So I have I don't buy project bags very often. I have quite a few that I've sort of either bought or made over the years. So I'll show you one that my friend Leanne made for me so long ago, and I have used it. I've shown this before, I think, but I've used it to the point where it is actually literally falling apart. And it's one of these kind of, I guess you call it like a knot bag or a dumpling bag. I don't know, I guess it's got a few different names. And it just sort of has like one longer side than the other, and I can hold it on my wrist or put it like that if I don't want anything to sort of randomly fall out, but I usually hold it like that if I'm knitting with it. So I actually like this style for walking and knitting, because I can have that as long as it's not too heavy, the project's not too heavy, usually something like socks or a beanie, and I don't like the bag to weigh too much itself, because then that's just more weight on my wrist. So this one was made for me, and my friend, I don't know if it's still available. If I can find it, if it's still available, it's a sewing pattern. She made this, and so I made versions for myself. It was a free pattern, but I don't even know if it's still available anymore. So I made this one here. This one had no interfacing, and this one here had some heavier interfacing, and I found that the one that I actually liked my friends the best that had sort of a lighter weight interfacing, so a little bit of structure, but this is just a little bit too, I had fun making them, right? Like they're a pretty easy project to make, and picking the fabrics, like just using quilting cotton. So I use these ones all the time. I did buy, I have bought a few over the years. So I bought this one, was at SSK 2015. I've just got that tag is coming off. I need to sew that back on. At Super Summer Knit Together. This is Amy Beth made this, Fat Squirrel Fibres. I like this size project bag for like a sweater quantity, not a massive sweater, but like a top or a smallish sweater. And then I think I talked about this one on the podcast a little while ago. This is the Field bag. I don't use this one a huge amount, probably because it's just a little bit heavy, sort of a heavier fabric. I use it around the house, but I wouldn't use that to knit with. But it does have like a drawstring. I think I must have made this one, I don't even know, donkeys years ago, probably from a Craftsy class. I think it was actually, and it has like a channel where you put the, so it's lined and everything, and a channel where you put the drawstring through. But the thing about that is, like, if I was trying to use that, I find that the bag spins around, or the yarn as it comes out spins around this, and it gets caught up in it. So I don't really love that. That's why I find if I actually have it on my wrist, I like these ones the best, because there's nothing really for it to get these don't flip around on my wrist. They sort of stay pretty stable. I think here's another one that I got. I think this is the Silver Shed USA. But another small one that's quite heavy and quite thick. So it's got sort of a maybe even batting inside it. I find that a little bit much. So just like a lightweight interfacing I like. But I can't remember the last project bag I bought. Actually I was gifted one from Tao, from the Knitting Swan. And I really like this one for at home. It's like sits stable, and I think I've got Fiola in there, and it's got like pockets on the inside. So that's really good for a sweater quantity, but obviously and I actually really like that it sits up by itself, and the pockets you can sort of put your pattern and needles and things, or if you had a couple of different yarn balls for colour work or whatever. So that's another really nice one, but that was gifted to me. So, that's it for project bags. So my next question is, what was the first sweater that I made, and what did I learn from it? So the first sweater that I made for myself, I was 12, and it was a very oversized jumper with 3 strands of yarn, black, white and pink, held together. I'm almost positive I used an acrylic for it. The needles were probably about that thick, 15 millimeters or something, 20 millimeters. They were huge. And I've got a picture of myself wearing it. It's a bit of a blurry picture, but I'll just pop it up there. It had these enormous pom-poms where you sort of like, I don't know whether you crocheted a strand or something, and then passed that through some eyelets around the neck, and 2 big pom-poms on the end, which you sort of tied in a knot. So I must have seen this in a magazine and got the yarn for it and knit it up, obviously, very quickly. And a friend of mine, a neighbour, she helped me with it. And what did I learn from it? It's so long ago, like 12 is nearly 40 years ago for me. So I'm sure there were things I learned from it, I just can't remember. But I think I've started showing in my regular podcast a segment which is, garments that either haven't been worn or barely worn. And so the first sweater that I've made since as an adult knitting was in 2009. And I think what I'll do is I'll show that, I don't have it handy, but I'll show that in my next regular podcast. And there are a few, I can remember making that, and there are a few things I can say that I've learned from that, which was still a long time ago, that's still 15 years ago, but, I have a Ravelry project page for it, and I made notes and whatever, and I used a different technique and everything, so I'll bring that up in my next regular podcast when I get back from holidays. My next question is, how many garments have I knitted, and how many get worn. So I actually could not tell you how many I've knitted, how many garments I've knitted. Certainly, I would have made some baby sweaters as well, but even adult size garments, it would be hundreds. I've been actively knitting every day for about 16, 17 years. So, in that time, and I do knit every day, and I like knitting garments. So, yeah, definitely hundreds, certainly over 200, but I couldn't tell you for sure. But yes, how many get worn? Yeah, I wear my knitted garments all the time. I wear my knitted dresses, tops, jumpers. So they get it, like, as to what gets worn more, it just depends. Like, usually the newest one gets worn a lot. But I'm finding that my older sweaters that were much more fitted or really long aren't getting as much wear as my sort of more oversized ones that I've knit more recently. And I guess that's what happens with style, right? Like clothes that you buy, you wear the newer ones more than the ones that you've had for a really long time. That doesn't mean you never wear them, you just don't wear them as much. How many hours do I knit a week? I'm not sure. I've never actually counted. I don't sort of set a timer or anything, and I don't have like a set schedule. I do a lot of multitasking, so often I'll be doing it while doing something else. So yeah, I couldn't answer that question accurately. I mean, it would be interesting to set a timer and every time I pick up needles, press start and stop and just see over the course of a week. But I'd probably forget, so, no, it wouldn't be accurate. So if I ever do it, I will, at least I could try it, right? But yeah, it would be interesting, but yeah, I couldn't answer that question. Right. Next question, how do I manage my whips? How do I decide what to work on? The thing is, I like to see progress. I usually have 6 or 7 projects going at a time, or sort of somewhere between 4 and 7. Different ones like a sock or a hat or a garment or a lace or colour work. And as to what gets worked on, I don't want anything sitting for too long, but I generally tend to work on something that is going to fit whatever else I'm going to do. So if I'm watching TV in the evening, I'll pick something that's mostly stockinette in the round. If I have just some quiet time and I actually have like an hour or two, I might be doing some, lace work or colour work where I have to concentrate on the pattern. Sometimes I focus based on like, I really want to get this to a point where I can try it on, and I know that I won't have a chance to try it on for the next few days because I'm really busy at work, so I'll try and get that to that step or to that section where I've split for the body, so that then I finish the yoke, I finish the increases or whatever, and then I'm working down the body. So I sort of try to think about not just what do I want to knit right now, but where do I need to get this, if it's a garment, to where I can try it on, etc. So it's a bit of a, and sometimes I'm like, this is what I'm excited about. Like when I was making Magnolia Bloom, I was just like so excited by it and wanting to complete it. I also wanted to complete that before it got warm, which it already is now. But so sometimes something takes me and that's all I want to knit on. But most of the time I just spread myself around a little bit. My next question, this is, I guess, probably sort of related. How do I manage to get as much knitting as I do during the week, and any advice for fitting in more knitting time? I think multiple projects on the needles does help, because then you've always got something. You don't find yourself with an opportunity to knit but nothing in a place where you're able to knit. And so if all I had was complicated stuff, or everything was at the point where I needed to think, but then I just wanted to go for a walk and take my knitting with me, and I don't have anything to knit on, then that's time that I would have liked to have been knitting, could have been knitting, but didn't. So I've always got something in that position that is sort of for a different purpose, or I try to cast something new on. That's probably why I end up with so many new projects. If I want to do that and I don't have anything handy, I'll start a new thing so that I do get... So multitasking is a big thing. And, like when I go for a walk, I knit, and I'm often listening to an audiobook, or I might be calling a friend. So I do a number of things at the same time. I've been helping my son with his maths, and in helping him with that, like I'll sit with my knitting while he's doing it and doing a question. And then I'll just put it down when he needs help, but I'm not just sitting there doing nothing, right? So multitasking, that's how I get probably as much done as I do. So my next question is, how do I find suitable patterns and yarns for living in a city like Sydney, which is hot and humid? So Sydney can actually get quite cold in the winter and even in spring and autumn. And also our houses aren't especially well insulated, so I find I wear sweaters quite a lot throughout the year. I also wear like knit dresses in spring and autumn because wool is so breathable, and I also tend to use a lot of fingering weight wool or cotton, but mostly fingering weight wool because I find I can wear that most of the year. But in the middle of summer, I would probably need to use a fingering weight or wear fingering weight cotton. What I'm wearing right now, actually, I probably should have mentioned it. This is the Cumulus Tee by Petite Knit, and that is 100% silk. It's fingering weight. It has sleeves on it, but it's very light and breathable, and I can wear it, and certainly if it had no sleeves on it, I could wear it in summer. So, yeah, I guess that's the kind of, like, I tend to choose yarns, and I also make sleeveless tops, and I've used linen and that kind of thing. So, but I tend to pick lighter weight. I don't use a lot of DK weight cotton. And if I do use DK weight cotton, it's not for the middle of summer. It would be more like a spring or an autumn knit. My next question is actually an interesting one to me. When teaching knitting, do I get many left-handed knitters, and how do I cater for them? So I actually haven't had that many left-handed knitters in my classes, and when I explain something, they seem to just adjust it for themselves. So I don't teach a lot of beginning knitting classes. And so the ones that I, would teach perhaps might be ones where people are picking up stitches. Well, that is different for a left-handed knitter, and they go in a different directional pickup. But I've just found that they've been able to, it sounds bad, but they've been able to figure out the modification for themselves, which it sounds like you've probably had to do that. I'm sorry, the person who asked me this question is a left-handed knitter. But it's something that I think I'd like to be more intentional about and be more aware of, and in terms of catering for them. So I'd like to look that up to figure out a little bit more about if you are left-handed and you knit, what's different for you. So I'm really happy actually if there are people who are left-handed who are watching. I'd love to hear from you as to what do you wish people who are teaching would know, because I feel like it's not something I've gone in with a lot of knowledge about, but I would like to have that ready in case someone is left-handed and they're not actually or they're finding it difficult how I'm explaining something, what I can do differently. My next question is, what are my favourite knitting podcasts? Now, this could be a really long laundry list, which would be quite boring, and I've just written down a bunch. So I think what I might do is, rather than, I don't know whether I just list a bunch or you know what, I might just mention the ones that were sort of off the top of my head, and there's certainly a lot more. So if you happen to be a podcaster and I haven't mentioned yours, I'm probably watching, but you never know. And actually I'd love to know from other people if they can put in the comments if there's a podcaster that I haven't mentioned. I might be watching already, but I'd love to hear from other people as well. So Kim and Jonna, I love watching them knit together with Kim and Jonna. Hella from Danish Musings, Selma from Little Big Knits, Leanne from the Knitty Stew, Rachel and Jessica from Those Twins Who Knit, Amy from Knee Knits, Lisa Makes. She used to be And So On, and I've been watching her for years and years, back when she was primarily knitting, but now she's Lisa Makes because she does so many different crafts, so I really enjoy her podcast. Diana and Katie from The Fruitful Hands, Paige and Sarah from Two Pearls in a Pod, Amber from A Lovely Yarn, see, this is a laundry list. Stephanie from Edible Thoughts Makes. I love Fruity Knitting. Mel makes stuff. She doesn't put many out, but I always enjoy them when she does. Jane from Mindful Making. And obviously there's a ton more, and I keep finding more podcasts, even like ones that I haven't, they're reasonably new to me, like Good Knits and Mishi Fraz. So there's, and I know, I feel like it's sort of hard, like when I start listing, I'm sure there are other ones that I watch, but they haven't haven't podcasted for a little while, or I haven't sprung to mind, so I don't want to, I have a very long list of podcasts that I watch, and sometimes I'll miss some because I just am at a busy period of work, and I just accept that and watch the next one when it comes out. Oh, like Young Folk Knits and Wool Needles Hands, Taylor. So yeah, look, heaps, obviously. I love them, and that's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to create one, because I enjoyed watching them, and I thought, I wonder if I had something that was worth sharing. So, Right, next question. My favourite method for knitting sleeves. This question almost feels like a contradiction in terms, my favourite method for knitting sleeves, because I actually don't really enjoy knitting sleeves, mainly because I haven't found a method that I like doing. So I do use magic loop, so that's my favourite, as in it's what I use and it's like the lesser of all evils. I'm not anti-sleeves, I just find small circumference knitting not that much fun. And yet I do magic loop for socks, so I just don't like having, I think probably more than anything it's turning a garment and having to move it so much. Socks, it doesn't bother me with magic loop, but it's a bit annoying when you've got sort of most of the garment, because usually when I'm doing sleeves I've at least, well, if it's top down, I've finished the yoke. If I was knitting flat or like pieced, that would be no big deal because I'd just knit the sleeves flat. But even then, I would probably have picked up the sleeves and knit down anyway because I really don't like setting in sleeves. So then it would be even worse. I'd have the whole garment. So that's probably why, one of the reasons I get a sweater to just past the arms and until like I've finished that ball of, or I'm splitting off for the sleeves I should say, finish that ball, and then I do both sleeves so there's not as much to move around, and then then I go back to, then I finish the rest of the body. I also like that because then I can like figure out my sleeve length, accurately, and also my body length is not later going to get pulled up by sleeves. So magic loop, and I don't like small circulars. I don't have anything against them. I don't think, that this all depends on your knitting technique. So I knit English, I knit with the yarn in my right hand. I leave a knit, so I have the right needle sort of in the groove between my thumb and my forefinger, which means I need a decent length of a shaft of the needle. And with the small circumference, like with the small circulars, the tips are often really tiny, and I can't, with the way I knit, I can't like put that, I don't have a needle tip to put in that section, and my hands just cramp up. So I just find I can't really use, I think I used them a little bit for ranunculus, and I managed okay on that. And I actually did quite like them for that, for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe I held them a bit differently. But normal 4mm or 3.75mm needles with little tips, I don't like it. So, it hurts my hands. So yes, magic loop. And I don't really like using double-pointed needles because I always lose one. My next question is, what do I think is the stretchiest cast on for a beanie? I actually just like the long tail cast on. I usually find it quite stretchy, but I find a tubular cast on is a good one for a 1x1 rip. My next question is an interesting one, and I'll connect it to my next video, which is, how do I manage to have the correct yarn to fix an old item? Where do I keep my leftover yarn? Now, I don't throw much away. I'm not a hoarder, but if I think there might be a use for something at some point, I struggle to get rid of it. Like, it would have to be the smallest amount of yarn, and even then I'm like, oh, that could be used as waste yarn for sleeves or whatever. So if I have a substantial amount of yarn left, it's just in with all of my other yarn for something, for a beanie or stripes or whatever. So I know where that yarn is if I need to fix something, because it's still in stash. If it is only a small amount, like not even enough for a project, like maybe 5 grams or something, then I have another whole bag full of little balls of yarn from projects, and I have a few bags of those, and I also have a bag of swatches. So I'll show that when I show my sort of organising stash video, because it's not stash, but it is like leftover yarn. No, it's not leftover yarn that's usable, but it's something I need to store. So I will show that in the video that'll come out next week, my stash video, sort of how I sort of store that. I'm not very good about labelling, but I am pretty good about looking at a yarn and recognizing the colorway and the weight. And obviously if I still have the thing that needs fixing, I can match it up against it. So that's an easy way for me to identify, yes, that's the right yarn that I need for fixing this. So I think I've yet to find something that's needed fixing, and I haven't had the yarn for it. I'm sure I get this from my dad. So my dad, he's passed away now, but he grew up in what was Yugoslavia, it's now Croatia, during the war, and there was not a lot of, during the Second World War. So he was born in 1933, so he was, I guess, like, young, not a young child, but a child during the Second World War, and they wouldn't have had much. He definitely didn't throw things away. So my dad was an electronics technician, and so when you use, you've got your butter containers, like the plastic butter container. In the US, I think you have more like sticks of butter, whereas in Australia we have more like a spreadable butter or margarine, and with a lid on it. So those containers, after we'd finished the butter or the margarine or whatever, they would always get washed out, and he would use them for his bits and bobs. So the house was always filled with those sorts of things, or screws and things that had would, like, I would never throw buttons away. I would sort of, if the shirt had a rip in it, I'd probably cut the buttons off. Anyway, so I've always managed to have the leftovers, because but at some point space will become a premium, and I'll have to start to get rid of things, but not at the moment. So I think that's kind of the answer to that. But you'll see in my stash video next week just where I have sort of had to reorder that a little bit, so that it doesn't get sort of sucked into the rest of my stash, because it's not really stash if it's got like 3 or 4 grams. That's all it's good for, is to, if that project gets a hole in it or needs mending, that's what it's for. I think that's it for the regular questions, like the non-personal, knitting, just purely knitting related questions. I've had some questions that are personal questions, so feel free to leave me now. But if you wanted to hear some of the answers to the personal, they're not super personal, but I mean just not necessarily knitting related. So I'll move on to those now. So one question was, how old are my children? And a sort of related, a couple of people asked me that, but someone also said, am I planning to sell and downsize, like sell my house, due to children leaving the nest? Kids' ages. My daughter Mia is 21. She'll be 22 the day after Christmas. Alexandra is 19, and Zach, so girl, boy, Zach just turned 17 last week. They all still live at home, but Mia just bought a property, but she won't be moving into it for a little while. So she'll probably still be here for a couple of years, I think. I'm not sure. So in terms of downsizing, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but I do sort of think ahead, and even like we've lived in this house for about 10 years. It's a big 5-bedroom house with a pool and a yard, and so like you don't just sort of decide you're going to sell and move, like, or sell and the next day the house is ready. There's things in my mind that are like getting the house organized. So we redid the bathrooms. They were leaking, so we kind of had to. But there are other things that kind of need to be done. So my brain is kind of in that phase of like, it is going to happen in the next few years, but I don't want to overwhelm myself to do it all in a month. So my brain is kind of in terms of like just trying to get some repairs and things done over time. And I wouldn't want to be buying big furniture or anything. Like if you just still see yourself leaving in a couple of years, it's hard to sort of, I don't want to like add more stuff, if that makes sense. I mean, yarn doesn't count because I'm making things, and but I am planning on making things for Mia for her place, right? So I want to make a blanket, and even though she's not moving into it right away, she'll have access to it, and she's going to start sort of putting things in there. So I am, going to be making things for her, but she won't be moving in for a little while. So no, I'm not moving out of this location anytime soon. But it's a big house, and it's a lot to keep, like a lot of maintenance. So I'm looking forward to having less of a yard, less upkeep. Right. My next question is, what do my family think about the podcast, especially the kids? So my kids actually think it's awesome. YouTube is their world, and so they think it's really cool that I have a channel on YouTube, which is really sweet, and my husband is really proud of me and supportive. So yeah, which is really lovely, and I think my mum is too. And like my other extended family, my in-laws. I know that my mother-in-law watches sometimes, so which makes me happy, and I love that my family are happy for me about it. The only thing, actually, I'd say one of the things that I wanted to do a podcast for years, but I was, as a high school teacher, I was actually a bit nervous about the kids kind of ridiculing me over it. And then I got over that. I just was like, whatever, like if they think it's daft, well, if I don't really care, it was more just being made fun of and having an opportunity for them to poke fun at me. And it's hard enough teaching as it is. They can poke fun at what you're wearing or whatever. But then I just was like, well, if it doesn't bother me, then that gets pretty boring. Like if they mention it, and I'm like, yeah, I've got a podcast, then I guess there's not much else to say, right? So, but actually, funnily enough, they haven't been like that. They haven't. They've asked a couple of questions, but I've never, at least not to my face, been made fun of. So, which is nice. And as far as my kids, I know they can be quite private, but I just try not to share too much about their personal information, only unless it's sort of related or connected to me, or they've already said yes, it's okay for me to share it. My next question was, 2 more questions. How long have I been teaching? So there's a little bit of a long answer to this because I've had lots of breaks and things. I tutored maths when I was at university back in the early 1990s, and so that was not teaching but tutoring. And then when I was at university, I wasn't doing education, I was doing science law, and so I was a lawyer for about 5 years, and then I retrained. So I retrained in 2001, 2002? No, 2002. I retrained in 2002, I did my Diploma of Education, and then I started teaching in 2003, like in schools in 2003, but I actually unexpectedly fell pregnant, and Mia was born in December 2002, just after I finished my degree. So I started work part-time because I had a baby, and I worked for a couple of years, and then I had Alex, and then I had Zach, so I had time off. I had about 7 years off, and then I went back to teaching in 2012. And then I had a little bit of time off in 2014 when my dad was sick. But then in 2016, it's what happens, right? I'm older, I've had up and down. 2016 is when I started at my current school, and I've been there since then and haven't had a break since then. So I've been teaching on and off for a long time, and I love it. I just absolutely love it. I love maths, but I also love the relationship with the students. Like, I love the pastoral care aspect. I love this stage of life for kids when they're teenagers, but they're just starting to make their own choices about their direction in life. And yeah, I just enjoy watching that and watching them grow. And I also have been teaching knitting classes at Skane Sisters since 2018. So yeah, anyway, I love my job. I'm not sure, because I had so much time off, it doesn't feel like I've been teaching for that long. But I feel very fortunate to love my job. I didn't hate being a lawyer, but I didn't love it. Whereas teaching, I just absolutely love. And so, I feel fortunate to have found that a job that I love, which is nice. It doesn't feel like work then. All right, last question. Well, sort of 2 questions. How did I meet my husband? And are any of my children interested in knitting? So I met my husband through a mutual friend in Sydney, and my husband's American, and he was already working and living in Sydney. And I had just returned from working and living in New York, and that's when I was retraining to be a teacher. So we met and started dating, and that was that. And he decided to stay here. He'd already been here for a few years and loved Australia and decided to stay. But I think he does miss America, so we go pretty regularly back to see his family, and they come out to see us. And then as for are any of my children interested in knitting, all my kids know how to knit, but none of them do it regularly, right? And my daughter Alex did for a while, like she knit herself a cardigan and some beanies, but I think at the age and stage that they're at right now, it's just not, like, they've got other things to do. And I probably was a bit the same at their age. It was only really after I had my kids, and I was about 30 when I really started knitting pretty regularly. But they all know how to, right? So maybe one day when they're older, they might pick it up again, and they'll certainly have plenty of yarn to to pick from me if they want to make something. Right, that was a lot. I don't even know how long this is because it sort of started and stopped. But yeah, so thanks for asking all those questions, and I really appreciate it. And I think I've asked a couple of questions like about knitting left-handed and things. So if anybody has any information about that, I'd appreciate that, or other podcasts that you watch that you enjoy. And so next week, my podcast is going to be on stash sorting while I'm away. And then the week after that, when I get back from holidays, I'll be back to my regular episodes. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in a few weeks.